Hi, everybody. This is Chris McHale, CEO of SPK and Associates, and I'm here with Mike Solinap, and we're about to discuss exploring what application management is and the advantages of application management, particularly related to SolidWorks PDM, which we do a lot with. And Mike, why don't you go ahead and quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll jump right in.
Sure. Mike Solinap. I've been with SPK and Associates for 17 years now, and I lead up our cloud and infrastructure practice here. And we do a lot of hosting for customers for SolidWorks PDM, as well as other similar engineering applications.
Great. So maybe we should just start out by asking the question, what exactly is application management? It's actually a term that's used not for various different things, but it means one thing when talked about the application development area, and it means kind of another thing or a related thing related to off-the-shelf software like SolidWorks PDM. So do you want to give us a definition or kind of a description of application management?
Sure. Maybe I can start off in talking about, what's typically offered out there in the industry. Typically managed service providers will say that they provide application support, but when in actuality they don't. They really focus more on the infrastructure side of things. So what folks are more accustomed to are some servers that are under management. Maybe you have operating systems that need to be patched. You have endpoint management and anti-malware, antivirus software, maybe some RMM software that controls those servers remotely. That's all very common, but that doesn't really address the needs of the application. It doesn't address the needs of the users, and there are a lot of gaps that that we hope to solve with our application management.
Okay, and then maybe also give us a little differentiation between application management and just what I would call traditional application support that you would get from the vendor, for example, in this case, maybe SolidWorks or a partner of SolidWorks.
Sure. So yeah, going back to the comparison with the standard model with managed service providers, typically customers will say, well, I've got my managed service provider support on the infrastructure, and I've got support through the application vendor. And between those two, I should be all set. That's typically not the case. Because let's say, for example, I'm the customer and I want to implement something new within the application, and I don't have that expertise in-house. I've got CAD designers and I've got mechanical engineers on my team. They don't know the nuances of the application and some of the more complex things that go along with it. So they reach out to the application vendor and they put in a support ticket and they say, okay, SolidWorks support, I'd like to configure a new workflow, for example. And oftentimes, SolidWorks support or these other application support vendors will say, okay, well, what's broken about the application? And the customer's like, well, nothing's really broken. I just would like to implement something new and I want to see how this works. Can you help me? And that's kind of where the difficulty lies, right? Sometimes a vendor will say, well, that's really a project that's more suited for a professional services organization. And then that becomes a very difficult process of, getting a new project going, some new budget. And meanwhile, the customers are kind of stuck in what they're wanting to do.
Right.
So with SPK and application management from us, we understand the application very well. We understand the infrastructure very well. And we're able to support customers in that fashion where we can take the requirements, we can configure the application, we can pull in the vendor when needed for issues where maybe the application has a defect or isn't behaving the way that it should. And then we end up saving the customer and those mechanical engineers time and effort in having to do that themselves.
And I would say also cost, because if it's something that nobody in-house knows how to do, then typically they have to engage the services of the vendor and or partner. And doing one-off projects is fine. I mean, it works okay. But each time you got to kind of get going and start, and the vendor has to understand who the players are. They have to familiarize themselves with the environment, with what they're trying to accomplish, and so on. So it ends up taking a lot longer. Whereas an application management engagement, which goes on and on and on, we typically really understand the customers or the client's needs, their business needs, and then, like you said, all of the environmental issues in the application. And so we're really just sort of an extended part of their team, their engineering team, is kind of how I view it. Would you?
That's right. That leads to some very efficient support. We understand the customer's environments. We don't have to ramp up each time.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a very efficient thing for us.
Mm-hmm. In the case of, let's talk a little bit about SolidWorks PDM in particular. When you were talking, I was thinking about some different scenarios, which might help paint a little bit more of a picture. I would say with the smaller client that has SolidWorks PDM, what they tend to be missing this role in-house, right? Because they're maybe too small, and maybe they'll reach out to their IT department, but their IT department doesn't really have anyone who knows SolidWorks PDM very well and understand that. Then over on the larger client or the larger company side, what do you typically find there? They might have some SolidWorks PDM in-house, or do they, or don't they, or how does that usually work?
I think what I've seen in larger organizations is that they may have a CAD admin who's very familiar with maybe the parts and the product, the drawings that go into SolidWorks PDM, maybe some configuration also. But again, it's not something very complete and holistic where that CAD admin may know, for example, what might be causing performance issues within PDM, right? And for us, SPK, as I mentioned, we've got expertise both on the application side as well as in the infrastructure. We understand how these applications interact in different scenarios that we've implemented for many customers. So, we can quickly troubleshoot very common things like performance issues, right? Whereas in a larger company, you may get a network admin that gets pulled in, you get the CAD admin that gets pulled into the issue, you get the users that get pulled in, and thus it's really soup to nuts, anything from a new user that needs to be added to new workflows and data cards that need to be configured within the system, all the way to, like I mentioned, hey, the performance is slow. We can help figure that out no matter where the issue is.
Yeah, I think you do. You end up handling a lot of performance issues because nobody knows quite how to triage those. They're hard to figure out, for one thing, but you have to have a little bit of knowledge in all of those different technical domains in order to hone in on what is the real root cause or the problem with the performance. And everybody usually says, oh, it's networking or something like that. And then I think it's rarely that. I don't know. Does that ring true to you?
That totally rings a bell. Like I mentioned, in larger organizations, you'll have a database admin, right, who's responsible for the SQL Server side of things. You'll have the networking folks with connectivity. You'll have the Wintel folks who are watching the VMware infrastructure. And it can be a tough situation in trying to narrow down issues.
Yeah. Let's see. We talked earlier a little bit about, we've been talking about benefits a bit, and we've been talking about the differences between application management and what I'd call traditional vendor or application support, particularly in this case, SolidWorks, and what you'd get from SolidWorks or the SolidWorks partner. Are there any other benefits that you would want to bring out or mention? I have a couple, but just see if you have any first that application management brings versus these other methods.
Yeah, I think reliability and support is really one big benefit to the way that we approach application management. One example is, with SolidWorks PDM, there are new versions that come out almost every year, and the CAD designers always want the latest and greatest. But there are actually compatibility issues that they need to be aware about. So, and oftentimes these environments are regulated environments where you can't necessarily just upgrade to the latest version. They need to be validated. There needs to be strict change control around these environments. So we work with a lot of customers to define a process for upgrading these applications, making sure that they're tested appropriately, and then deployed out to the users in the right fashion.
Right. That's a big one, I would say. Let's see. Another one I was thinking about was integration with existing systems. So no application lives in a vacuum these days. And matter of fact, if it does, everybody wants it to talk to something. Nobody wants data silos, right? They want, even if whether it's on the application side or on the data side, they want integrations. And that is difficult to do if you don't understand the that both or several applications that are involved. And an application vendor or application support obviously is not going to do that because they don't know the other application or data structure, and they're not going to step in that water necessarily. But we've actually done a lot of those, and we'll then go ahead and manage the integration afterwards. Does that ring to you too? And have you seen that with SolidWorks PDM or more with the other applications?
Yeah, absolutely. So very similar to the infrastructure side of things, where you may have a database person pointing at an issue versus a networking person pointing at another issue. Likewise, you have the application pointing at one issue potentially, and the system that you're integrating to pointing to another issue. And so being able to have knowledge about both of those applications, how they play together, is really important. We have expertise on our team so deep that we actually understand the database schema behind SolidWorks PDM, and as well as many other engineering applications. So we're able to really get in there and make sure that these applications are talking to each other and integrate well.
Right. One other thing I would say, going back to your more overall deeper and kind of broader, both deeper and broader support of the application, and we're particularly what we're talking about here is SolidWorks PDM. I would say with some of the smaller companies, a larger company could perhaps afford to have and also have a volume of issues around SolidWorks PDM that they could afford to have one person that was dedicated, not the CAD admin person, but more of a SolidWorks PDM admin person who was dedicated to that tool, trying to work with it and respond to user issues and so on, but really optimize it for that particular environment. But that's a pretty big company, and even the mid-sized companies, they can't really have one person dedicated to that. So if they do, that person tends to be time shared. So I do SolidWorks PDM, and then I do this other thing and this other thing, and then the minute you start to get into that, you dilute the capability and the understanding of that person, that they just have to keep up with more things, and so it's a bit harder. Whereas we have people that are 100% dedicated to keeping up with SolidWorks PDM and administering it and managing it and keeping up on what the vendor is doing, and then also on what the business needs are for our clients where we're doing app management. To me, that seems like a really huge benefit.
That's right.
We can save so much time and money, right, in doing app management for the client, which we haven't talked about yet. But I think saving money here and the time, but saving the money is a big, huge benefit. I don't know. What do you think?
Absolutely, and consider the availability of that single person, right?
Right.
They go on vacation, they get sick.
Right.
What happens to the business when they're not available?
Right.
Does this stop? Does change come to a halt?
Right.
It's really important consideration.
Right. Yeah, I always like to talk about how you just don't have one or two people, where you have a whole team and a bench, so if somebody's out of the game, you can pull somebody in off the bench, to take over and to help. Yeah. Well, that's a great discussion. I mean, I hope that's helpful to the people who are listening to understand a bit better where application management fits and why it's valuable. Any last thoughts, or should we just go ahead and close it off?
Yeah, I think that was a good discussion. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for your time today.